I guess to spare everyone's time,
Sure.
we'll, if Kingston's able to join us, then we'll welcome them online. And if not, I've just started recording, so they can always review the recorded session afterwards as well.
Great. Great. Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. The intent behind this today is to kind of do a bit of a wrap-up of some of the experience that we've had over the last couple of years. We're going to, both Jonathan and myself, CAC has presented to you some questions and surveys, and you've all been very good to respond to them, and it's going to give us a lot of information as we're going forward. We can spend some time in looking at some of the general themes and so forth, but you've done a good job to provide us some direction on that. We will try not to spend too much time on that area. The area that particularly we're going to be looking at today is some discussions on some barriers. We can talk in some general barriers that you found through the process. Maybe we can have a conversation about it. And then some discussions about some of the benefits that you saw. And then we can look at maybe some strategizing in terms of ways to improve the experience and to enhance the benefits of the accreditation process to move forward. Now, in saying this, I just want to indicate that very beginning of this process back in the fall of 2014 when we met, I believe it was in Ottawa, and we had a conversation about beginning this journey on accreditation. There were some principles that were kind of laid down in those conversations. One that I heard very clear is that the process must respond to the regional uniqueness of each center. And so as we have moved forward, we've tried to look at each center from that perspective in terms of understanding some of the uniqueness that occurs within the centers. And as I was just talking to Kara at the beginning, each of you have responded uniquely in how you put your evidence together to support standards and accreditation. So, and which is a good thing. The pilots of these 4 centers, of each of you represented here, has provided some good templates that can be utilized to hone in and fine-tune to support other centers to go through the process. So it is hopeful that although the process was unique, responded to the uniqueness of the centers, that hopefully through this, through your participation, through your hard work that you've done, you'll help put together some processes that will assist other centers that may not have the resources that maybe you had available to you during this accreditation process. So we're looking at streamlining, we're looking at taking your experiences, but yes, also recognizing the uniqueness that each center has and to continue to move forward with this direction. The other thing that I heard very clearly...
Calvin, I'm just going to interrupt for a second.
Sure.
I think we had someone else join us on the phone.
Oh, yes, it's Colleen in Kingston. I'm sorry I'm late.
That's okay, no problem. It's great that you can join us, Colleen. We just got started just about 3 minutes ago.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Good. Well, thanks for joining us, Colleen.
Oh, thank you, Calvin.
Good. I just kind of laid out the, how far did I just start on the principles when you came on?
Yes, I think it was just about a minute ago that she signed on there. And don't worry, she'll get a copy of this anyway, Calvin. Yeah.
That sounds good. The second principle was recognizing accountable, sustainable governance structures. And now this was the central component of the accreditation process, was to look at recognizing, not necessarily dictating, but recognizing what accountable, sustainable governance structures are. The 4 centers you are well established, and you had some established governance structures. My understanding as it begins to move out to other centers that there may be some issues with governance and the blueprint or the framework that is within the accreditation structure should support all MFRCs to adopt a similar process going on, and that there is some collaboration that can occur between different centers to support this sustainable and accountable structure moving forward. The other thing that we looked at is to strive to be inclusive of all reporting requirements of MFRC. Now, when we met in the fall of 2014, there were some documents that were provided. That was the parameter of practice, the MOU, being mainly those ones, and the family-based center model that was proposed. And so we were initially, when I was talking in 2014, I had a thought that the parameters of practice would form the foundation to begin to move forward. As we got into the process, I began to realize that although MFRCs are not short on documents, you've got lots of documents, lots of planning pieces to it, but it's not tied together in a way that would allow for a national focus in terms of moving things forward. And the parameters of practice, although I thought was a very good document for what it was created to do and laid out some good outcomes, it didn't have the implementation to support it on a national level. And so, as such, I can see the decision to move to a different model and to streamline it probably makes sense. So the accreditation standards was to tie those together, and I hope that for some of the centers you found that the framework of the standards did help you to bring it together. The fourth point was to create a framework that promotes standardization of evidence-based practices throughout all MFRCs. And that's what we heard at the beginning, is what the principles that we began to work on is to allow for uniqueness, recognize sustainable governance, strive to be inclusive, but also to create those conversation pieces so that MFRCs who are subject to a lot of transition can carry some of that gains that are being made from one center to another center, and that they have the language to begin to work together and support each other to move forward, so that there is more standardization of practice moving forward. So when we started this process, that's the principles that we worked on and tried to move forward with. Within the process, where are we at today? Well, everybody has walked through this process, completed the pre-site. We have one center to do an on-site in August. We'll be looking at having all 3 centers awarded accreditation status in August sometime. Or within August 5th, and then the last one will be awarded the first week of September. So by September, we should be completely through the process, so within the 2-year phase. So in moving forward, some questionnaires were provided to you, and I want to pause at this time and allow you to speak to some of these observations that were made for the data and so forth. Was there anything in these questionnaires that, and the reason why I'm asking you this is so that when we put our learning together, we can accurately dictate or pinpoint what is the areas that we need to work on to move forward. So are there any information or data that came out of these questionnaires that you would support or that you would like to add to? Is there anybody, let's look at this. Do you find these statements to be reflective of the process that you experience?
Well, yes to some of them. This is Kara. So I guess this was my first time going through accreditation, although some of the staff here have gone through accreditation at other places of work. So one of the elements was the family-centered component, although I would suggest there are very few accreditation bodies that I know of that specifically do family support, like family resource centers. So I think no matter who we were with, so that was a challenge going through it. But I think that the change in the, you did create new standard or change some of the standards. So definitely that helped so that we were able to take a look at them. And when I did take a look at the BC Association of Family Resource Centers, they have an accreditation process. And certainly there were a lot of similarities across standards. The language was different. So in terms of requiring a family-centered definition of standards, I do think that there was some achievements made in some of the changes, but if it was to continue, that there was still more to be had. So I would agree with that one. Similarly, depending on the goals, I guess, Jonathan, from Military Family Services, it is helpful to have national guidance on some of those things. And so if we're doing outcome measurement as an example, so that whole section 4 of the standards is military, so we can all have, that can look different unless, I think we could do a better job of having a national kind of approach to some of the standards for all centers. That would be helpful going forward, and especially if you're looking at making sure there's a standard of practice. So I do think that would be useful. The question remains, and there is debate here, depending on who you ask, on the ability of other centers across the country to be able to meet some of these requirements. Not that I think that they're unrealistic expectations to meet those, but smaller centers and that have different capacity, there's certainly, accreditation takes time. I've not heard anybody go through accreditation process in this organization, outside this organization, that say that it doesn't. It has to do it correctly. So the ability for it to go across the country, I don't know what that looks like. I think that there was flexibility within the process to make it reflective of MFRCs. So I don't know if I would completely agree that it's not reflective. It's just I think there was flexibility there to make it fit. I think if I was doing more standards in the future, then perhaps there would be some things that I would emphasize differently than others, and that's where I guess. But I do feel the process that there was flexibility, and you were very open to that. And when we went through sections that we felt maybe they did or didn't fit, you were able to explain it in a way so we were able to adapt that. So that made sense. Yeah, I guess that's my commentary on that. I don't know how other centers feel of their experience or what that looks like.
Yeah. How about you, Colleen? How did it...
Actually, I thought what you said was spot on. It really was. We, certainly as you know from our discussions, Kelvin, for us, it was wonderful in that we really did start from scratch with our policies, etc. And certainly the process gave us the flexibility to be reflective of our operations here. I do think, just as you had mentioned, that there's lots of ability for us to have more standardized approach on some things and share resources. Yes. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and this is a pilot, so there's going to be some tweaking that it needs to go on, and definitely it should create a framework, and the first time you go through accreditation is just to get your baseline in place. The next cycle you'll go through will be looking at how you maintained it over that period of time. Yeah, that's good, Colleen. How about you, Bob and Rose?
Yeah, I agree with the things that I've heard already. What I'll add to that is there's a
Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Calvin. This is Sana. I joined now. I could not hear you at the first time.
Oh, okay, not a problem. Dr. Nata is part of CAC. She's out of Ottawa there. She helps me with some of the compiling of some of the evidence for the report. And so she's just going to listen in so she can kind of guide the process. But I'm sorry, Bob, go ahead.
So as part of the pilot, we go through that fairly extensive list of standards, particularly the ones that address governance and management. You know, and a person hears often enough in their life that there are no stupid questions. But at the end of the day, you're reading a standard internally, questioning in your mind whether is this something I need to bring in, or why doesn't this standard make sense to me? And some of those questions I certainly did put to you over the course of time that we dealt with, but some of them a person spends a fair amount of time trying to apply a particular standard without the kind of clarity that other bases might get as a result of us having gone through this pilot. Because we're going to have a lot to be able to offer to say, this is how we dealt with all of these things. And I know we tried hard to do that amongst the 4 pilot bases as well as we went through this. And that certainly helped to a degree. I agree with the comment that was made about the processes. We're not exactly not reflective of the reality. There were some that didn't apply to us in the context in the way that they were written within the standards guidelines. And I do appreciate that you were quite open and willing to consider those points of view. And that did certainly result in some changes in how some of the standards were written. I had a philosophy from day one that we could only be better at the end of this process than we were when we started. And notwithstanding that I believe we have always functioned to a high standard, I think we've put in place some things that weren't in place in quite the same way as they are now. I'm not sure that our families that we serve are going to see the end result of accreditation. I think a lot of it is really, truly internal. Our employees are seeing a lot of change, a lot of things where we've taken an existing procedure that perhaps wasn't drafted and put on paper in quite the same way as it is now. So for us, I think we would say this is very heavily internal in the way we function, but likely won't be particularly visible to the people that come into the center. We'll continue to do the supporting those families in the way we always have.
You know, and you're right, Bob. It is an internalization of it, and of course, then it should free you up. And I'm talking too much, but that's good comments. Now, okay, any more comments on this slide here? And Rose, I know you don't probably have access to the slides in front of you there. But
Jonathan sent it to me.
okay, very good, very good.
Yeah, and Calvin, I'll just given that there's a few folks missing, I'll just bring up a few other quotes that were brought up in the survey there. Just that speak to the process not reflective of the MFRC reality. So one of the quotes is, there was a disconnect between family resource programs we offer and clinical practice evidence. CAC was looking for, sometimes the language and standard didn't seem to quite fit family resource center support. Another quote is, language of the standards is not entirely family-centered and is overly clinical in tone. And then another quote is, standards are not family-friendly and are overly complex and numerous. So that's where that theme kind of came from.
Okay.
I guess the interest that the challenge is, without having others to compare to, I don't know, you know, being the first experience with accreditation, I can't speak to what other standards outside of, I don't know of others that do family resource centers, so that's a challenge, I'm sure, of how standards are written to be reflective of family support when there's very few that actually do that specific kind of accreditation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and MFRCs are such a unique form of service delivery that that it's very difficult to find a standard that actually fits with the unique nature, especially given that they're unique as an entity, but also in amongst themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any other comments on this slide here? Okay. Now, within, and I don't want, you've had an opportunity to look at the aggregation of the surveys there. And there was some correlation. I think, you know, I think that definitely it was very strong human resource intensive. And as Bob had alluded to, you guys blazed the trail. That we will now be utilizing some of the work that you've done and some of the way that you wrap your heads around it to put it into some framework that is going to guide some of these other ones through the process. So, and you had to start from scratch. The four of you had to really start to scratch into how you're going to bring that all together. So that would make sense. National guidelines, and Kara, I think you spoke to that, and I think that's true. I think from an accreditation point of view, having 4 different leads over the 2 years created some differences as well in terms of knowing from the start what the objectives were to the end. And being at the start, we had looked at not doing French. And then halfway through, that came on the table, and so we complied to it, but we have an area to grow in that area for sure. So the process too detailed, definitely there is some detail within the process, but most of our accreditation process lies within the self-study. The on-site should be just a confirmation of the data that you've presented to us in the self-study, and as we move forward. So in terms of, is there any data that came out of our surveys that you would like to talk about? And I'll just quickly go through it as we give a moment here. It's a good spread. Go ahead.
Just taking a look at these and revisiting some of the goals that we had set up, or that you talked about in the beginning in terms of governance, for instance, without having done kind of a a pre-evaluation of where centers felt they were. How we respond to that is going to be reflective of that. So if there was a certain level of confidence that we had in those already, or if some of those structures were strong, then the accreditation process and how we answer those questions, it may not have enhanced those things if if those structures were strong already. So it wasn't an evaluation of, you know, we were able to demonstrate that they existed, we were able to demonstrate what a structure looked like, but we weren't in doubt about the governance structure in the first place. So I would just suggest it's a little bit, those questions are difficult because was it beneficial? Well, Valcarti's not here, but I know them to be a very strong organization. So, like, if that's strong, then it may not have benefited you. It's not that it wouldn't benefit; it's that it may not if your structure is strong. I don't know. I just think those questions are difficult to take and see. To have the expectation that accreditation would do something that may have existed already. So it enabled us for an outside organization to take a look and for us to demonstrate that. But if you're asking if it was a benefit, perhaps it was already a strength in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good comment.
And Calvin, I agree, because here we didn't have strength in that area, so for us the benefit was enormous to actually go through that process and create those associated policies and procedures too. So the benefit was huge for us because we didn't have that strength in that area.
That's good. And as this gets applied to other centers that are maybe not as established, or maybe have, like Colleen was saying, it'll give them a framework that they can build from. Definitely, you know, Halifax and Valcartier and Edmonton, you had some consistency in leadership over the years. Kingston, there was a turnover of leadership, and so having this framework helps them. But you're right, Karen, there should have been a pre and a post. It's important in considering the questions that when you answer no, it wasn't a benefit, it's not to say that it wasn't, that the process is not, but if that was not where you were at or you weren't looking to move that further because you were confident in that, then you would answer in a different way. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in here and just say, please. I know it's quite difficult to offer this kind of feedback, and we very much appreciate that you guys have taken the time to not only answer surveys but join us here today. Please do continue to offer frank feedback, knowing that neither Calvin nor I are going to take it personally as to the feedback that you offer, because I think it's very difficult when these things are close to you to be impartial. But at the end of the day, what we need is good data to know whether or not what was useful, what was not useful, and how to improve the system. So the more frank that you can be, the better. And I know that both Calvin and I are strong enough individuals to be able to take both negative and positive critique on the nose.
And it's really about learning. It's about making the process beneficial. What I did like about the response is that this question here, do you feel that the investment of resource, time, expense required became worthwhile? And so there is value that I saw that was drawn from this. As a lot of these satisfaction comments, we came in, positive, so I'm glad that was the case. So let's, we've started talking about this already a little bit, but this is where Jonathan was talking about just being clear on terms of some of the barriers. So what we asked you to do here is to pick the top three. Now these are some that you might have already articulated, in your survey or already today, but maybe we'll just kind of go around to identify what the top 3 barriers were and then what the top 3 benefits were. And then we can talk about some strategies as well. Move forward. So Kara, since you set the tone here, what are the top 3 that just come to your mind when you talk about the barriers that you experience?
I like to use the word challenges because I don't think anything was a barrier in that we couldn't work with it. So what were our top 3 challenges? I think human resources, definitely the amount of time that we put into this. That was a significant amount of time. That was a challenge. Working with the standards for the first time, so going through accreditation for the first time and understanding language and applying it to family-centered practice, that was a challenge. And then there were some communication bumps along the way in terms of processes. Were the barriers resolved? Yes, for the most part. I think we were able to work through those. Those were the realities at hand. If not in your resource strategy. Again, in looking going forward at the capacity of organizations, other MFRCs to be able to do this amount of work, and not that we shouldn't have to, I'm not suggesting, but that is a reality. I do think that, yeah, working with language and the standards would, to make them more family-centered, that's a doable thing. And yes, it's a pilot project, so we learn as we work together about what works and how that works. So I think that's the story of a pilot.
Sounds good. Thanks, Karen. Colleen, what are the top 3 challenges that you had?
Kira said it perfectly. For us, and as you know, Calvin, because we discussed it, we were fortunate in that we had a staffing change in which it allowed us to hire a consultant to come in and help us with the policies, because otherwise that would have been a huge barrier with all the changes that we had gone through in that transition, and we wouldn't have been able to accomplish what we did. So human resources was huge. Kira summed it up beautifully.
And then language was just terminology, language, getting your head wrapped around standards and processing the language part of it.
We did need some clarification, as you know, on some things, but it was interesting to actually apply what we were doing every day and realize, for example, quality improvement, and realize how much of what we do is quality improvement. We had just never termed it in that way before. So that was actually beneficial for us and quite eye-opening to be able to align all of those things using the terminology that the standards had.
Good. How about you, Bob? What was your experience?
I have to say that the human resources part was a huge issue for us in terms of time.
Sorry, Bob, would you be able to move a little bit closer to the mic? It's a little bit difficult to hear you.
How's that?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, the human resources part was a bit of an issue from a time perspective, involving, I knew from the beginning that in order to be successful, everyone needed to be engaged in the process that we were going through, and that wasn't always as manageable as I had always hoped it would. Consequently, our process here in Edmonton was really Brenda and myself, and to get us to where we are. The language used in the standards was a bit of a challenge as well, and I agree with whoever said that there weren't really barriers per se. There were things that sort of kind of got in the way. The quality improvement one was, I had that same experience as well. In the end, the outcome is fine because once we realized that what we really had in place was a fairly well-functioning yet informal quality improvement process, we now have something that's in fact more formal. And really that's what accreditation standards looks for, I believe, is a degree of formality, a degree of structure that puts in place things that we're all going to follow versus those things that happen on a more informal basis. Yeah.
Good. And Jonathan had just noted on the bottom there, kind of the trend here, HR intensive, and HR intensive, or would you indicate it would be the HR costs for, is it a money issue, or is it just the workload issue that they're looking at in terms of HR?
Not a money issue, I wouldn't say.
Okay.
Yeah. Based on what's been said so far, my impression was it was the workload and the number of people, staff, who were engaged, and the number of hours that they spent on this.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of strategies and so forth, is there a dollar amount that would have provided you that a resource to be able to do the self-study? Do you have are you looking at an extra $10,000, $50,000 that you invested to do the self-study? Or is it hard to say yet?
I think it's hard to say, but we do know that a position for several months was dedicated to this project.
Okay, that's a good indicator. Okay. So in terms of some of the benefits, top 3 benefits, I've heard a couple you mentioned already, is identifying already existing quality improvement activities and helping to define it and to set it forth. Maybe we'll start with Bob, I guess, with this one. So the benefits, you saw going through it?
And I think I've mentioned this already. It caused us, or I might even use the word forced us, to relook at everything that we did. And notwithstanding that a large number of our processes were already done to a high standard, when you sit down and look at them with the fine-tooth comb that accreditation is, even those things that are to a high standard are tightened up in a way that makes them even more efficient and effective in terms of how the policies look.
Okay.
We actually have ended up with a standard operating procedure binder that we didn't previously have. We had them fairly loosely done, some of them tied into our personnel policy. So we now have, as a result of having gone through this, an additional binder document that now sits in each office. So that's, one of the major benefits of having gone through this process. And clearly, notwithstanding that our processes previously were relatively high standard, there are clearly some SOPs in place that didn't exist before. Things that, as a result of going through accreditation, we said, well, we don't have that. We really should have something in place, and now we do. So I guess that sums up the benefits from my perspective.
Very good. Thanks, Bob. How about you, Colleen?
gave us a wonderful opportunity, as Bob was saying, to review all of our processes and policies, procedures, and I have to say it gave us a chance to align and standardize and streamline some of those. For example, we discovered we had 4 different emergency plans for different parts of the organization, whereas we were then able to sit down and consolidate them into one comprehensive plan. So there were huge benefits that way as we pulled everything together. We also, as you know, were able to raise awareness on things like diversity and inclusion, which we had been talking about for really a number of years, but it again let us focus in that area and put things in place, and those are areas in which we'll grow. There were some great benefits as well in terms of staffing, in that, and Kara, we took your lead in that we engaged all of our staff in the preparation for the on-site. And I was pleased when the on-site was here, they actually said that there was consistent messaging with everyone. So that really did pull the whole team together and to realize the importance of what we were doing. So those are some of the benefits here.
Very good, Colleen. Thank you. Kara, any more to add, or?
Similar themes, so definitely the ability, we felt that we had strong policies and procedures, but it was the opportunity to take many, like we have policies and procedures, we had guidelines, and to be able to really take a look at them and review them, update them, organize them in a way that made more sense. Similarly, you found you had things in a couple different places, repeating things, and so you're able to consolidate things. So I think that internally those things were strengthened going through the process. That was a significant benefit, and allowed employees also to re-familiarize themselves with some of those things. And I agree too with conversations around inclusion, diversity, those things. Reinforce the importance of those and prioritize those in a different way for us. So yeah, those are good points, Colleen, I would agree with.
Very good. I'm going to close up here shortly here, but I guess the second question is in terms of what would be the key message you would share. Now, I want you to put the HR intensive component to the side, because that is a piece that we will try to address both in terms of streamlining our process more, or looking at talking to Jonathan and seeing what framework that we can put together to assist on supporting organizations within a self-study component. But without the HR component, I would like to ask the question, would you feel when you're talking to a Sharon to another center, what would be the key message that you would give, and what would be your recommendation you give in terms of the accreditation process? Is that clear, or did I muddy it all up? Maybe we'll start with, I guess, Bob, we'll start with you again.
Sure, no problem. If I was giving some information on accreditation to a base that was about to embark on their initial accreditation process, I think I might be inclined to caution them about consulting with the 4 pilot bases, only because, as you've indicated clearly, we each approached how we did this in a different way. And I think if I were a base that was now going to go out and seek some feedback from the 4 pilot bases, I'm gonna get a lot of different approaches to this thing that may be less beneficial, because I'm going to go, okay, well, how am I supposed to do this? Do I just do this any way I want? Or is there one better approach? How do I begin working through this? How many people do I involve? I'm not sure that that once all is said and done and the 4 pilot bases are accredited, that there wouldn't be some benefit to arrive out of a post-accreditation meeting just among the 4 pilot bases to kind of put some stuff together that if other bases are going to step up and go through this process, that we can give some consistent messaging about how to best approach this. You see what I mean, Calvin?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
If they call me and ask for some help, they're going to get an Edmonton focus. This is how we did it, and that might be a slightly different message than they're going to get from Kingston or Valcartier or things. So.
Absolutely, and what we'll try to do, and definitely I want to give the opportunity to come together, but it's like when your team, Bob, came to the office there and looked at different policy manuals.
Yeah.
You were able to select one that was a best fit for you and gave you kind of a bit of a starting component. And with Kingston doing up the guidelines like they did, that assisted in terms of that. So there's definitely, and our internal, and we'll begin to develop that internal specialist that will kind of guide organizations through accreditation process and help them to kind of narrow the trees so that they're just focusing on the areas that best reflect them. But that's a good comment, Bob. That's good to know. How about you, Kara? What would be a message that you would share with a new center looking at accreditation?
I think it is a positive experience where you learn about your organization. It gives you an opportunity to get things, either to create things that you have to, or to better the things that you have. So that is a great. I think that is a benefit. The key part of this too is this is a process-oriented. If ever there was a process-oriented thing, this is it. And so, for people that struggle or do not like process, this will be difficult for them. So, I am a process-oriented person. So this was, I do see the value of accreditation. For others in our organization where that's a challenge, that still remains a challenge in terms of the pros of accreditation. That's a struggle. So an organization has to understand what they're undergoing and embrace that this is a process-oriented activity that has value. But if you're not ready for that, that is a challenge.
That's a good message. Okay. How about you, Colleen?
I think that following what Bob and Kara have said, that without a doubt having the standards in place certainly increases the professionalism of an organization, and you feel confident in having those standards. And again, you've got that foundation on which to build, which is great. I mean, already we're looking at things that need to be tweaked and modified. But certainly, Calvin, in terms of recommendations, I would highly suggest, because we did share resources, we did between us. Perhaps having done it, we would have, now knowing, we would have shared more. For example, all of the brand new policies and procedures, and we were talking about the reference guide that we did here, to share that with everyone so that it's more a case of looking and seeing what fits and can be modified to best meet the needs of your own organization, rather than we created so much from scratch, which was time consuming. And as I said, we were fortunate in that this year we had the resources to do it. But for example, if we had to start again as a new organization this coming year, we wouldn't have those same resources available to us. So definitely the sharing of what's already been done and those learned lessons, I think would be beneficial.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's a good message. So overall, what I'm thinking is that you saw benefits in it, but there is definitely work, and it's definitely, you're right, Kara, it's a process oriented. Some people in the organization will be attracted to it, others are more in direct service focus. They think it's a waste of time because they could spend more time providing services. But in the end, it does free you up to be able to spend more time with your clients as you get some of those internal structures aligned and in place. So, okay.
I do have a question, I guess,
Sure.
for both Jonathan and Calvin. As we look at the evaluation of this, it's important, obviously, the centers that went through the pilot to share our experience, and we have done so in the two surveys and today. I guess I'm also wanting to get feedback from the, two, but I don't imagine it's going to happen today, but the other two important stakeholders in this process, which is Military Family Services, who had their idea of what this was, and so where they are with it and how they felt it went and the future of where it's going. And as well, Calvin, from your organization, who also had the opportunity to participate. So obviously our voice is important. Yes, we did the pilot, but you as two other stakeholders in it, it's important for us to hear. And we met together 2 years ago or whenever that was with the goals that were achieved, that we put forth. So from the perspective of Military Family Services, where are we with those and what does the future look like is important, as well as we've invested in our organization, absolutely, through this process, but also we did so to see how this would work for other MFRCs and what that would look like nationally. So I guess we certainly have interest in what feedback you both have.
That sounds good. I'll talk to Jonathan. And we'll see if that's something we can arrange, maybe another meeting where we can come together in a room and have a conversation.
Yeah, I'll just I can offer for a few things right now. Just that. Basically, now that we're at the end of the pilot session, we got to look at, okay, how effective was it, which is the reason why we really appreciate you guys offering your frank feedback. But then I was just explaining this to Calvin last week as well when I went over some of the comments that you guys offered in your survey. I was just explaining sort of the next steps in the process, and the way it looks right now is that I'm going to take this evaluation, any other feedback that we get as centers just finish off the last parts of the accreditation process, then submit it to the director with basically a list of options as to how to move forward. But the short answer in terms of the future is I don't know, because I don't know how much money we have to dedicate to this in terms of nationalizing it and expanding to all centers. I know that that was the original intent, and I believe that still continues to be the intent, but I don't know what that's going to look like in the next year or so. That's why this evaluation was really important, so that then I could submit it to the people who make the decisions about what projects are going to be on the action list for this year, and whether or not we can move forward with the nationalization, or if it's going to be some sort of smaller initiative. But long story short, you should know in the next few months, after my supervisors have made a decision on that, as to where we're going with accreditation.
Do we have the opportunity to see what you're putting forth in terms of recommendations?
Yeah, I can. What I can do is I can sort of summarize it in an email to you guys, if you like, to basically outline what the observations were. Now, I don't think, having said that, I don't know if it'll be all that useful to you guys, because it'll basically be kind of a summary of what you've already seen in terms of the survey that you filled out, the survey that you did for Calvin, some of the comments that were made here today. But yeah, for sure, I'm happy to summarize that in an email, what will basically be going to the directors.
Sure, that would be great, Jonathan.
Okay.
Good. That's it. And I think I think we've kind of approached this these questions here. So in terms of where do we go from here, and I'll finish up with this because we're getting up to that hour. CEC will generate a report based on the presentation you made today, as well as all the surveys and feedback that you have given to us. And we will not we're not going to be drilling down the data to identify any one particular center, but more overall themes and areas that we could improve in. And thank you for sharing those things with us. CEC would like to establish a standing subcommittee of what we call a process review committee for military family resource centers. And as Bob was indicating, this is something that I would be open to do to bring you together once everybody's gone through the accreditation process. And the whole purpose of this subcommittee would be to look at future development of standards and accreditation processes moving forward. So we can utilize some of the gains that were made through this pilot, maybe create some tools, maybe standardize some of the approaches that are taken within our accreditation program, look at language in more detail, and support the development of standards. And we have an internal process that goes through that, developing of standards. And then, you know, and also offering an opportunity. We do have our member organizations that are accredited with us, the opportunity to sit on our accreditation panel. And these are senior managers, directors of their centers that come together to award accreditation status based upon the merits of the reports that are presented to them. So the reports go blind to this accreditation panel, but they have a criteria and that they work with them to award accreditation. And it's very rewarding because you get to sit with other sectors and other program directors and have continued network and share experience. So before I go, though, I do want to open it up to Lisa and Rose to be able to make comments that impress them or that their observations from a distance of this process. So, Lisa, do you have any comments you want to share? Oh, I see she's not here. Rose, do you have any comments you would like to share? Okay. So with that, I've kind of finished my part. Is there anybody else have something they want to share or that we should address before we close the session?
I just wanted to say, yay, we made it.
Yes.
And Calvin, I'd like to thank your on-site review team as well for their flexibility. They were really wonderful at, changing schedules, to meet the needs of the community members who came in at different times, etc. And that was greatly appreciated.
Oh, not a problem. And that's the process. We need to be the guest in your environment, and we need to be adjust so that we're not creating barriers or creating challenges for you to deliver services. So I'm glad to hear that.
And yes, I concur. Hooray, we made it.
Yes, and we're going to be having an accreditation panel on the 5th of August to present your organization as well as Cartier to the panel, accreditation panel. So we'll have a decision for you after the 5th of August. So, well, Jonathan, is there anything more that you would like to add?
I don't think so. I'd just like to thank everyone here, yourself included, Calvin, for all your work on this. Like I said, I'll summarize. Basically, as you guys probably know, we've said along the way. Here, I'll turn on my camera here. Of course, we have people that we report to as well, and the way they like to receive information is very concise, because generally they receive about 200 to 300 emails a day, and several briefing reports per hour that they have to sign off on. So what it's going to look like in terms of what I'm going to share with you will probably just be one page, sort of summarizing, because that's really the attention level I find of most of the readers I write for, because they've got so much to go through. So it'll just be a one-pager sort of summarizing the key themes that were talked about today, some of the key challenges, key benefits, what are some of the improvements to the process, and then that'll be served up, and we'll see where we're going to go. And like I said, hopefully we should know by around the September-October timeframe how we're moving forward with accreditation. But having said that, thank you so much to all of you, and I agree with you. It's been a long haul for a lot of you guys, a lot of process to work through, a lot of work behind the scenes. So you do deserve to pat yourselves on the back and have an extra margarita this summer.
Yes, and thank you. And you all deserve a gold star for the work you did. So thank you so much for your participation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Jonathan, are you going to stay on for a moment?
Yeah, still here.
Hey, Jonathan, I guess it's just the two of us here.
Sure.
So what was your impression?
It was pretty good. The reason why I jumped in there partway through is I felt like people were feeling a little bit nervous about hurting people's feelings and stuff like that, and I wanted it to be more about, we want to get realistic feedback, and we want people to feel like this is a safe place to talk about whether or not they had issues with their staff or CAC staff, or issues with MFS and how they've handled things. I don't want people to feel like they're, they constantly have to work around people's feelings and stuff like that.
I didn't get that sense from these centers. They've been very direct and very honest with us, and like Kara is very clear in her feedback, and I think the comments that were made were